story behind this talk is an interesting one. I gave another talk a few months ago at the platform engineering community about bad abstractions and what companies get wrong when building internal developer platforms. And kicked off a whole discussion. And one of the questions that came up in the chat was, well, like, how do you build a good developer platform, right? And how do you, when you're getting the abstractions right, when you're building a platform that solves real problems, how do you actually go about measuring that? And then I think Sam said to me, "Oh, Nathan, come back and do a second talk on that." And here I am today. So what I'm going to do is really focus on today what a lot of people get wrong, some horror stories about building bad platforms from other spaces, but some analogies, and then how to focus on ROI and actually build something that solves real business problems and to measure it. As a little bit of background beyond that, so I'm the CEO of Robusta Dev. We turn Slack into a self-service portal for developers, and we're lucky to work with some of the most interesting organizations in the world who build internal developer platforms. So I've had a chance to learn from some really great and smart people out there about that. Okay, so let's start with a $25 billion mistake. Does anyone know what this is? So this is the Airbus 380, and it was $25 billion mistake. It was supposed to be the next generation airplane. Airbus built it to compete, I think, with the Boeing 747. And they built it. It was a huge, big project. I believe it was the biggest plane, maybe still is the biggest plane ever built. And it turned out being a huge, huge flop. The cost was more than $25 billion, but that's what they lost in the end on this and wrote it off eventually and shut down production entirely. And there is so much to learn about this in platform engineering. And when you think about it, there are some parallels as well. Airlines are building something not direct for customers. Sorry, Airbus is building something not direct for customers. Airbus is building something that then airlines go and adopt. And if the airlines go and adopt it, then they roll that out to their customers. And they got it wrong. They built the wrong thing. I mean, they got it wrong. They built something that no one actually needed and uh, didn't sell and ended up costing them a lot of money. Now, Alex, I hope your platform doesn't cost that much either, and I'm sure it won't. But that's the topic today on how to really avoid that. Okay, so let me. Oh, and the interesting thing about this, I forgot to say this, is that it was actually estimated to have 15% lower operating costs than the 747. And in all truth, it did, just in all the wrong ways. So it's not like they didn't think about the ROI. They thought about the ROI. They just got it all wrong. So let's look for a second to why and why that happened. So the obvious reason when you said what went wrong is to say, okay, there was no adoption. No one adopted our platform. No one used the Airbus A380. Well, that doesn't really answer the question. I mean, why was there no adoption, right? So the real reasons that went wrong here is it solved the wrong problem. It assumed what's called spoke hub, meaning if I want to fly from, let's say I want to fly from Nice to New York, then I will first go to Paris. Paris is the hub. And then from the hub, I go to New York. Or if I want to fly from Nice to Seattle, maybe, or Nice to Chicago, I'll go from Paris, from Nice to Paris, from Paris to New York, that's the hub, and then from New York to Chicago. So you're going essentially via these hops, these central hops. And that turned out to be the wrong pattern in the coming decades. Point to point, flying directly from Nice to New York became much more common. And then Horizon, part of that is due to Horizon business travel. So people um, ended up preferring saving time as opposed to saving money. So they prefer just direct flights as opposed to the cheaper flights in the spoke hub pattern. So that was the first reason. They solved the wrong problem. Well, you solve the wrong problem. Normally you pivot, right? You shift, you solve a different problem, you can adjust. Well, there was no flexibility here, right? Because they built the world's biggest plane, it only worked under certain assumptions, and there was zero flexibility. And this was really the topic of my last talk here that triggered this whole topic was about building the wrong abstractions and building platforms that have no flexibility and why that's such a huge mistake. So they solved the wrong problem. There was no flexibility. And then the final factor that killed it is it took so long to get out there that by the time like it went live, of course the world had changed. Of course it was solving the wrong problem. Like, because arrived, I don't know, 2 decades later, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it arrived so much later that by the time it arrived, of course, everything was different. So now let's take this for a second back to the platform engineering world and really ask three questions. Well, how can you be sure you're solving the right problem? Is your platform flexible? Can it adjust to change? And then how long until you benefit? Can you accelerate the timeline so that you get benefits from the platform today and it's not this big, like long 3-year plan and then maybe you get the benefits at the end and there's huge, huge risk on that. So the interesting thing about this is there's actually a huge shortcut and you can actually cheat this whole thing. And instead of like really doing all the planning up front and making sure that you're solving the right problem and making sure you're flexible and like understanding the timeline to benefit, there's actually a cheat code for this that lets you work backwards and actually get there much faster. And to kind of really copy from product and from startups, the concept of a minimal viable product. And here's how you do it. So I call it an MV platform or a minimal viable platform. And it starts by doing things the reverse way that people usually do them. So usually you build a platform, then you try and get adoption, and then you measure the ROI. So when you build an MV platform, you do it completely backwards. You start with the ROI, and there's only a single KPI that you need for ROI, for return on investment. And I call that the platform equation. And I'll show you that on the next slide. So you start with a single KPI, and that KPI is all you need to build a good platform. And then you ask yourself, what's going to move this KPI by 25 to 50%? And it's such a simple KPI, that's an easy question to answer. And then you focus in the immediate term just on building that and doing a small iteration that helps you build that. You verify the improvement so you see that you really moved the KPI. And then you go back to step one. And by doing it like this, and I'll make this all more concrete in just a second, then you can actually go and you can like hijack the whole process, take a cheat code. And if you're on these short iterative loops where you just have one really clear KPI, and it has to be the right KPI, but I'll show you what it is. You have this one really clear KPI, you're trying to move that KPI by 25 to 50%, these really short sprints. It's actually hard to go wrong. You solve a lot of the problems with this big platform that's not flexible. It ends up getting no adoption. Here, like you have to have adoption because you're working in these short cycles, and each cycle you get adoption, right? So what is that magical KPI? And I call it the platform equation. And what the platform equation essentially does is it says, well, when you really like simplify it to its simplest, then what is a platform? Platform is a way to empower developers to do things on their own without involving DevOps or the platform team, right? Or other teams. Well, how do you actually measure that? What does it mean they do things on their own without involving the platform team or the DevOps team? Well, why don't you just measure the number of support tickets? Look at how many support tickets developers in your organization are creating for your platform team, or look at how many Slack messages they're sending you asking for help, and then figure out what is the cost of each of those tickets. So take the number of support tickets that are being generated in a weekly basis, or the number of Slack messages your DevOps to platform team is getting from developers asking them for help, or the number of the people even you have to employ on your support team, right? And the number of questions they get on a weekly basis from developers. And then figure out how many hours does it take to solve each ticket. And then multiply that by the person who's answering it by their hourly wage. And now you have a dollar benefit. So if let's say on week one, you're building a platform, you're building an MV platform, minimal viable platform. Let's say on week one, you have 10 tickets a week. It's a fairly small number, but you have 10 tickets a week that you're getting. And on week two, you have 9 tickets a week, right? And I'll show you how you get there in a second, but you have 9 tickets a week because your platform is doing work and now developers can do self-service. And now the developers don't need to come to your team, they don't need to open up tickets. You can get down to 9 or 8 tickets per week, right? On an average. Well, like now let's say it takes 2 hours to resolve each ticket. Let's say you're paying your team $75 an hour, $100 an hour, right? So now you can translate that to a real concrete dollar value. Um, I'll go on for a little bit and then address some common questions about this. Now, there's a few assumptions here and a few common objections, and I'll stop for a moment for questions. And then I'll show you how you actually prioritize, like how you actually make that number of support tickets move down. The first assumption here is that you're getting here extra time. So the assumption is that you have something to do with extra time. Like you have roadmap items you would like to get to and you can bring them forward. Like if you end up doing this and you're freeing up time for your platform team and you really build a great self-service platform, and now developers are going, they're not asking you any questions, they're not opening tickets for you, and your team has nothing to do, well, technically you're not ROI positive because now your team has nothing to do. So you're not actually saving any money. You've just saved time for your team, but your team has nothing else to do it with. Well, that's typically not the case, of course. So we look here at like your ability to now take the extra time and do something productive with that time, Or if your team is growing and you're like bringing on another 1,000 developers onto the Kubernetes platform, or you're moving to cloud, and all these other things are happening now, maybe you can grow your team by only like 3 people and not by another 10 people, not by another 10 people because of the load is smaller. So that's the assumption here that's baked into this on how you would actually get a dollar value benefit. And then a few common objections are, well, devs don't open tickets. We don't do tickets. Well, in what way are developers today asking your platform team or your DevOps team for help? Are they messaging you on Slack and asking you to provision things? Are they messaging you on Teams and asking for help? Are they messaging you on WebEx and asking you to help them troubleshoot problems with their CI/CD pipeline? Like, there has to be some form of communication between the developers and your DevOps or platform team. And if there isn't, like, congrats, you've already built a platform, everything is working well. So, like, don't build another platform. Building a platform, the whole point is self-service. If self-service is already happening, then actually, you're pretty good. So this talk isn't for you, and you don't need that ROI. But if you're in an organization where you're getting those tickets and those questions from developers, then you can measure these wherever they happen. The second objection is that people often say, okay, I have no visibility into questions. Like developers message my team all the time on Slack, but they often do DMs. They direct message people on my team who they know will answer them faster. That's okay. You won't be able to measure the precise benefit, but ask a few people on your team. Give me a rough estimate of how many questions you get a week. Or did you get a question in the past week? Did you get a question in the past week? Did you get a question in the past week? Okay, we're getting about, I don't know, 10 questions a week. It's a rough estimate, gives you an idea of where you'd be with regards to ROI. A lot of times people say the metrics aren't accurate. That's okay. We're just trying to understand, like, are we in the ballpark? Does building a platform even make sense? And what should we actually do when we go and build a platform? Finally, we like build AI agents that answer some of these questions. So then there's an additional factor you have to bring in. If you're using AI or if you're like building your platform, there's a difference between the quality of answers, then you would add in here a factor for acceptance rate. So like let's say you have 100 tickets, and then of those 100 tickets, the AI agent gets 80% of them perfect, and then 20% someone still wants to escalate to a human. So you would then look at like 80 going from 80 to 0 would be 80. Sorry, going from 100 to 0 would be 80. And then you multiply that. Sorry, I'm messing up all my numbers. It's a little bit late at night. Maybe going from 100 to 0 would be 100. And then you multiply that by 80. So you get 80. You can multiply by the acceptance rate. Okay. Now, the really nice thing about all this is that it's actually prescriptive, meaning when you look at this, you can actually figure out what you should go and build. And then you can figure out actually like how do you move this number? And I'll show that in a second. But first, let me stop and see if there are any questions. So I see there's a comment here in the chat that like if you have self-service and it might be available but spread over 4 different dashboards which are managed by different teams, a single platform that unifies that and offers something like the golden path could still be very beneficial. So this is true. It still is really hard to measure the ROI on that. So you will get benefits from consolidation. I would look there also if you're spread across 4 different vendors, will you actually save on like vendor costs by migrating to one unified place? But it's the type of ROI that actually puts you in that danger territory, meaning the the challenge becomes you say like, okay, we have 4 different dashboards today, we have a bunch of different systems, we're going to build one thing that centralizes it. You actually have no way to measure the benefits of that. And sometimes you end up with like, if you end up building like one dashboard to rule them all, but it doesn't expose the levers that people need on each of the other dashboards, then you might end up putting people in a worse situation. And then they use the old one, but you also have the new one. So what you're saying is true. It just is very hard to measure the ROI on. So like when we look at with organizations like where you should start, we always say like, okay, start from the place that you can actually measure and say like, okay, we're seeing this big win over here. And the reason that also really helps on other things later on is because then once you get buy-in and then once people see like the impact that you're making, you also sometimes get the you get the trust and the support to build some of the other things that are a little bit harder to quantify. So I hope that helps answer some of that. Before I move on, any other questions? Okay, so let me go ahead. Now, the really nice thing about this is that it doesn't just give you a way to measure ROI. It actually gives you a really prescriptive plan for how to build a platform. And that goes like this, right? Like we're looking here at the number of support tickets and we want the number of support tickets to go down. So when you plan work for your next sprint, or if you really want for the next quarter, but you could do this on a sprint by sprint basis, all you have to actually say is like, okay, where do we have the most support tickets today? Well, you look at the data, put in an Excel spreadsheet, the last 10, 20 questions. You don't even have to take all the questions, just take a sample of the last 10 questions. That's usually representative. And then you say, okay, 3 questions, people had their CI/CD pipeline broke and they were coming to us for help. Another 5 questions, people got stuck and they were asking us to provision things because they don't have the permission to provision themselves. And then another 2, we were on some other random arbitrary things. Okay, well, now you know what to do in the next 2 weeks, right? Like if you look at the data I just said, well, it sounds like most people are opening support tickets or coming to your team because they're unable to provision software themselves. So like solve the provisioning problem, right? So where are people? Now you ask why. Like why can't people provision on their own? Can they not provision on their own because they don't have the permissions? Can they not provision on their own because they have their permissions but they don't know how to do it? Now you can like ask a really like granular question on why in that number one category. I say just focus on one category at once. So like focus on either CI/CD, focus on troubleshooting alerts that come in, focus on the on-call aspects, focus on the provisioning aspects, but just pick one of those for a sprint. Now you have an area that you can focus on. You can say, okay, well, why can't people do those things on their own? And really sit down and understand, like, why are developers asking you, the platform team or DevOps or infrastructure team, those questions as opposed to doing it on their own? And then you say, okay, well, now we know why they're doing it today. What is the fastest path to actually get them to do self-service? If it's a permission issue, are we able to grant them the additional permission, or do we need to like set up some more complex mechanism for authorization, right? Do we want to look at, is it because they just have no idea and it's too complex to set up a new microservice? So they always come to us. Okay, now you look at something like Backstage and provisioning and like templates, right? And some of the paid paths. Or is the problem that they're running into that they're running applications in Kubernetes, they know nothing about Kubernetes, and whenever their application goes wrong, they come to us and they ask us to like fetch the logs and troubleshoot for them, and they really have the access. Okay, now look at like how do you get an AI agent or something that can go and troubleshoot that for them? Or how do you give them a single pane of glass where it becomes really obvious, whatever solution you want to choose on that. But the nice thing about this is that it's prescriptive. When you look at this and you're trying in 2 week sprints to move the number of support tickets, at every single point in time, you have a really clear, like single best next step. So it's very hard to go wrong on this. And unlike that unlike that Airbus A380, where you build for a very long time, then you go out, you try and get adoption, it's completely wrong. Here you're getting adoption, you're measuring the adoption at the end of that 2 week sprint because you say now, okay, like, are we still getting tickets around provisioning? Well, there's a little bit of a training period, right? So maybe for the next week, every time someone asks a question on provisioning, you send them a link to the provisioning portal, right? Okay, but after that 1 week sprint, are we still getting questions around provisioning? If so, okay, well, it didn't work on the first shot. You need to fix it and again, go back and ask yourself why. But the really nice thing about this is it gives you a roadmap for how you actually go and how you build this platform. I'll stop again if there are any more questions around this. I'm going through this a little bit faster than I expected, actually. So if people have questions, feel free to pop them in now, and I will stop at the end as well. Okay, so let me continue. And no, so for questions, I believe you have to ask them in the chat. I don't believe the mic is open. Mohammed. So you can just write the question in the chat. And Carla, correct me if I'm wrong on that. Okay, so now there's actually two. So I'm going to make things slightly more complex. But the full platform equation, like if you really look at the full ROI, it's actually a little bit more than what I said earlier, because there's always two sides to this equation, and the way it works is, um, when you look at the ROI, then there's really two parts of that ROI. The first part of that ROI is what is the time that we're saving in our DevOps or our platform team? How much time are we saving by not spending time on those questions? And the the second side of that is how much are we saving on the dev side? like when devs are open a support ticket, right? You can assume that they're blocking, right? They need to provision something. They can't do it on their own, so they're blocked. So now they're blocked for a number of hours, right? So like if every time a developer needs to open like set up in some new infrastructure, they're blocking for 2 hours, and then they go off to lunch and take a coffee break and stuff. Then that developer will be wasting 2 hours per ticket. And then sometimes you have a whole team's blocked. Like some, as an example, if there's a problem with an application, they're opening a ticket and they can't do anything until that's fixed, then it might not just be blocking them, it might be blocking like two or three other people on their team. So when you calculate the ROI, you actually want to calculate how much time are you saving on the DevOps side, and then how much time are you also saving on the development side. To give some real world numbers on this, and this may surprise you, but if you take like an average, a relatively low average salary in the US for a DevOps or platform engineer, then and you assume that there are just 10 requests that developers make of platform engineers per week, that adds up to something around $100,000 a year, assuming you're spending 1 hour on each ticket. And then on the dev side, it's even bigger. That typically tends to be in the $100,000 to $200,000 range. Again, it's just assuming 10 tickets or 10 questions per week. And that's reflective of a broader pattern that the dev side actually tends to be much, much bigger than the DevOps side, because on the dev side, you can potentially block multiple people. So that's just a little bit in terms of ballpark figures. 10 questions a week tends to end up being a huge sum if you assume 1 hour per ticket. In many cases, it's even more. Now, okay, so there are a few other questions here. One is, so if there are no support tickets, it's not worth building a solution. Sometimes people go and figure things out on their own without needing to ask the platform team. So we would need to talk to them to dive into their pains. Yes, that's correct. I would I would be skeptical of building a platform in that case. I'm not gonna lie. If everyone in your organization today is getting by fairly well on their own, the question is, like, is there another team that they're falling on, or are there other problems? You could go and speak to them and learn about their pains, and then you work through how you measure that. Part of this is like a little bit of a personal bias, because just on the personal level, most of the organizations I work with tend to be enterprisey, Fortune 500. They tend to already have platform engineering and DevOps teams, and they tend to have teams already that like struggle under a flood of tickets or questions from developers. So a little bit of this, like in how at least how I think about measuring this, is more geared towards those bigger companies. If you're in a smaller company, then I would look at what are areas that take up people a lot of time where you can like not take up that amount of time, or what are other ways to save money. And I think I'll address some more of that in the next question. Okay, so Mohammed has a question, how to measure team productivity versus MTTR versus cost saving, considering the change failure rate versus lead time for changes. Okay, it's a fantastic question. Yeah, so really there's three pillars of ROI, and I'm only touching on one of them in this talk. I'm touching on the pure platform engineering one, meaning the pure platform engineering ROI is how do like I build something that then other people use so that they can self-service. So that's like the productivity angle. But then if you look at ROI for like sometimes people speak about building platforms, but really they're focused on reducing mean time to resolution or mean time to repair, MTTR. And it's more of an SRE use case. So when it's an SRE use case, it's a different equation, but it's really easy. An SRE use case, what I mean by that is sometimes people look at building platforms or like giving developers help when there's downtime. So it's more on call. And then what it looks like is like I run, let's say, a gambling a website, and we're doing I don't know, we're doing $1 million in revenue an hour. So half an hour of downtime is now worth $500,000. So then you would ask like, okay, can I look at incidents that we had recently? How many incidents do we have that impact production? And then if I take an incident like that, are there actually tooling that I can build now around how developers investigate on call and solve incidents that will take down the time on that? So if I can shave 15 minutes off, so if I can go from 30 minutes to investigate an incident to 15 minutes, I've just saved $250,000 because I know the cost of downtime for my organization. So that's actually an area that is super interesting. But I didn't I was debating whether to bring it in because we talk to customers about that sometimes, and it's like a common use case, but it's not really. It's more of an SRE use case than it is platform engineering. So I decided not to bring it in. But the calculation there is really simple, and it's actually one of the areas, Mohammed, to answer your question, when you're looking at building platform-like stuff, it is an area that tends to be really interesting, and it's an area that you can typically make a lot of traction in because one of the interesting things that you see with incidents is that when there's an incident, people spend like the first 5, 10 minutes just gathering data and pulling data from Datadog and logs from Splunk and looking at Grafana dashboards and all that. So actually, if you're able to shorten the time it takes people to collect data from all those different systems, then you can get an immediate like 5 to 10 minute reduction on MTTR, and that tends to be really easy to prove out. So that's actually another really interesting area. And then the final part of Mohammed's question is about cost saving in FinOps, which I'm not going to go into here, but that also obviously has clear benefits. I just wouldn't necessarily consider that a platform engineering uh, benefit. And then there's another question here. Does this formula mean bigger number of developers equals larger benefit? So not necessarily. If you have more support tickets because you have more developers, then yeah, that would be a larger benefit. But if you have a ton of developers by a small number of support tickets or questions that you're getting from them, then I mean, not necessarily. The core thing here is the number of number of requests that your team, your platform engineering or DevOps team gets from developers. It doesn't really matter the size of the development organization. Of course, in small development organizations, this does tend to be small, but this is the thing to measure, not the number of developers. And the number of devs blocked here correlates with the number of developers blocked on an average ticket. It's not the number of developers in your organization total. Okay, and then a question, should platform building be considered for larger teams only? So it depends. I mean, not really. It doesn't have to do with the team size. It just has to do with number of support tickets or the number of questions you're getting from developers. Um, okay, then another question from Mohammed, as an IT implementation project manager, it's difficult for us to measure it as it is to come up with resource readiness in each change. Um, yeah. So there's a whole bunch of other ways you can also look at ROI on that. Um, so there really are a few flavors of this, aren't there, right? Like I'm simplifying things down to like what I'm calling the full platform equation. But there are actually interesting ways you can go on. You can show how there's even more ROI than this. But as a baseline for getting started, this tends to be a really good starting place. And again, it's prescriptive, meaning it points you in the right direction to go and build things. And then I know that there's some frustration in the chat that the chat isn't saved. Um, does the chat get saved? Carl, I don't know if you know, does the chat get saved in the YouTube version afterwards? With some of streaming platforms, sometimes when I do webinars, the comments get copied over to YouTube. I don't know if that's the case here.
I will have to double check, but the comments and questions that you guys are seeing right now is in Zoom. We don't have any comments or questions in the YouTube live stream. So maybe not, but I'm gonna double check.
Okay, yeah. Maybe it's worth just screenshotting it sometime and sending out the end because I always do find the questions to be the most interesting part. Okay, and then there's a saying here, if you are not building a platform, the platform is building itself. Um, so I want to actually push back on that a little bit. I mean, there is something to that. When I think what Sharik is trying to say is that if you're not actively going building a platform, then people are going off on their own and doing their own thing. But that's not fundamentally a bad thing. Like if you look at what you're trying to build with a platform, like if you think of a platform as being like I built this really great like bullet train in Japan that goes at I don't know 200 miles per hour and gets to the destination super fast. That's a terrible platform because it's a path from a single start point to a single end point. And then when developers come along later, they can't go in their own direction. They're very constrained by what the platform can do. So while you want to build something that's centralized and organized, the risk here always with building platforms is you build something that's too constrained and then it doesn't get adoption, and you're slowing people down instead of making them go faster. So sometimes the like what people will go off and build on their own is actually faster than them adopting a central platform. So when you bring people into a central platform, again, you have to really think, am I giving this benefit and saving time, or am I putting on artificial constraints? Me. So, okay, let me move on. There's a little bit more here, really just one more slide, which is a little bit of further reading on this. Um, so first is this bad abstractions talk. I gave this with the platform engineering community a few weeks ago, and this was really the trigger for this entire discussion, actually. Um, and what I spoke about there is why building platforms that abstract away complexity can lead to very bad outcomes, and why people always think the goal of a platform is to abstract away complexity. When you do that, you actually end up slowing people down, not helping them speed up. So the best way to understand the talk today is really like second in a series of talks where the first was that bad abstraction talk. And I spoke kind of well, why you don't want to just abstract stuff away. And then today I'm speaking about how you actually approach it differently with with the ROI first approach and by focusing on the number of tickets and how that helps like focus the platform more on the right abstractions. And then the third part here is there's a blog post I did also on MV platforms. It's a little bit more technical than this. So it's more about like, okay, if you categorize the questions that you're getting from developers, and then you found that most of the questions are around how do I get set up running on Kubernetes and stuff, like what type of technical solutions should you look at for each of those problems? So you can kind of understand the talk today as like part two of this three-part series. And with that, I'm just gonna go over to more questions and uh, maybe we'll finish early. I see there's another question on RNA, sorry, on Q&A with from Abix. When I see this form, I want to minimize the number of support tickets for self-served, reduce the hours per ticket, and so forth. I think the word benefit feels non-intuitive because you want to reduce like cost, but benefits looks like something you want to increase. Yeah, this is accurate. So I actually wrote in here ROI, and then a second before I gave this talk, I said, wait a minute, that's actually not ROI. ROI has a very specific economic meaning. ROI would be like taking this whole thing and then subtracting the cost that it took you to build the platform. So like how many people you put in building it, how long did they spend building it? If there's a vendor cost, what did you pay the vendor for that? And then dividing that whole thing by the amount of effort. So ROI has a really specific economic meaning. So technically this isn't ROI, but you could view this as like you could well you really what I'm saying here with Delta support tickets is how much did you cause support tickets to go down? But yeah, you could frame this different ways. I guess I don't have anything smarter to say on that. And I'll mark that I've answered that live. Okay, another question about making the chat savable. Me, yeah, I don't. I can't do anything on that, but I wasn't aware it was actually possible on Zoom, but I'm sure Carla will check that afterwards. Yeah, okay, fantastic question. How do you assess if your IDP or platform engineering is impacting overall business goals, such as revenue growth, market share, and competitive advantage? Um, you can only make people move. Typically, when people look at these things, now I can speak as like CEO of a startup. Really, what the business always wants is the business always wants things to happen faster. Um, like I'm That was you can say as the CEO of a startup, wearing a very different hat, but like people come to me and want to invest in fixing tech debt. And I always want to say yes. I'm an engineer by background. I always want to say yes. But like what the business really cares about is like, how do we acquire more revenue faster? How do we move faster? And typically the product side knows how to do that. So typically like um, typically product, um, like we'll be able to say these are the improvements we should make, and if we can do these, we'll unlock new revenue, right? Typically, sales has stuff that they want as well. So really, what it all comes down to ultimately is how can we ship faster, and that's the part that you can impact on the DevOps and platform engineering side. And then when you're looking at like the hours blocked per ticket, and like this is also how you helping devs move faster and deploy faster and get out new features faster and spend less time blocked on things. So that's typically how people think about it. And of course, the assumption here is that when you're giving back this time, people will actually go and move faster and do things. But that's almost always the case. Then I see a question from Sharik. Entering a platform space always feels like a tools game. Buy Backstage, buy Human Tech. Do you agree, or is there a people process element to it as well? It's always both. Tooling is important. tooling is important because you're going to have tooling no matter what. Sometimes you're just going to go and invent the tooling yourself in-house, which has often a higher cost of ownership. But you have to, but it always is part of a holistic picture. So when you're looking at, like, I'll give you an example. Like, if you're working backwards from this, and if this is your goal, like number of support tickets times hours blocked, times like, we'll go back to the simple version. Number of support tickets times hours blocked times DevOps hourly wage, right? The main thing here is like the support tickets. And then if you go and you look at where are the top support tickets, um, most support tickets are coming in are people who don't have credentials. They know exactly what they have to do, but they don't have credentials, so they have to go to our team and ask for permission. Well, that's a case where I would actually have a cultural discussion and like a permissions discussion and say like, is it okay with compliance if we actually give developers these permissions that they need? And there's no tools involved in it. It's all the tools that you have already. Um, so um, it's not always, or sometimes you look at this and you discover that there's just a knowledge gap. People don't know a certain thing, and then it becomes like, how can we do like very often people will do a guild approach where you like take one developer from each dev team, and then you have that developer be like part of a DevOps guild that's a bunch of developers from all across the organization, and they're all like trained on DevOps practices, and then you're approaching this more from a training angle. So it always is a mix of both or rather, there's always a non-tool element, and sometimes there's a tool element. So I hope that helps. And then there's a question here, you can move faster doing the wrong things because with this formula, you enable internal users to do what they want, assuming whatever they're doing is the right thing. Well, it depends. I mean, this doesn't mean you don't have checks and balances in place. Like, but it might be that instead of opening a support ticket and saying, can you provision X, Y, Z? Maybe they open a pull request and then your team reviews X, Y, and Z. So in that case, you might say the number of support tickets is remaining the same, but we're able to reduce hours per ticket. And now, like the developers actually have the capability to do it on their own, but we are having a review process. So there will still be a small hours per ticket for our team to review it. So it doesn't mean taking the guardrails and the compliance out of the picture. A better way to view it is the compliance and the guardrails are set. So there's like a certain standard that you have to have in place. And then like how do you within the guardrails that you have, how do you enable people to move as fast as possible? So another example of this is I was just having a discussion recently with someone from a major bank, and he's actually on the security team. And he was interested in really seeing how they could reduce the number of questions that they get on the security team from developers because they have security policies in place on their Kubernetes clusters, and developers will deploy things on the Kubernetes cluster. The security policies cause those deployments to fail, and then people come to them and they're messaging them and opening up tickets for my application is failing. How do I fix it? So they're opening tickets for the security team because the security team's policies has blocked them from deploying. So this doesn't mean that you don't have security policies in place or that they can do whatever they want. But like it means that when people are failing, they should be able to fix those failures and understand how they fit within the security guidelines on their own without you. So I hope that helps. Okay, and then adding on the same token, I'm reading your question. I feel that platform always looks at adding resources, get me an S3 bucket quickly, but who's going to deprecate that bucket after its lifetime? I'm afraid of the cost implications. Yeah. So there's a need to have kind of some controls in place. Actually, when people build platforms, you're not just building platforms so that people can move faster. You're building platforms so that people can move faster, but also so that you can enforce a certain compliance or regulatory standards across the organization. And then that includes stuff like managing the ownership. So again, I would view it as like if you're going to manage the life cycle of these S3 buckets, right? Like people are provisioning stuff like S3 buckets. And then you have to track who owns each and every one of those things so that you can eventually deprecate it and keep track of cost and so on, right? So if you're doing that, then like that again, that's a compliance given, that's a regulatory given. That's like your level set. You can't change that requirement. So if you don't have a platform, right, or if you don't have any self-service, then people are going to manage that in Excel spreadsheets and it's going to be out of date and they're going to copy things over. Like if you have to manage the life cycle of those, then you have to manage the life cycle of those no matter what. So then the question becomes, how do you manage the life cycle of those in a way that is entirely self-service? So where people can still go on provision, but you still have that tracking in place. Meaning that tracking has to be done no matter what, right? So that's like a given, assuming that you want the tracking. But then how do you allow people to do the tracking and still self-service? Because if they don't, then now they're not going to self-service and you're going to have to track manually. So you're paying a double cost. So I hope that helps. Now, of course, like any, I think we're 43 minutes in, but like any kind of half an hour talk, I mean, you always run the risk of simplifying things. So I'm trying to speak here to the broad strokes, but there always are organization specific exceptions. And with everything, like you have to do an adjustment here for your own organization. So you have to take like this back and then think how you fit this into organizational context and what makes sense and what doesn't. But this gives a framework for at least how you start to think about that and how you start to run the numbers. And then, as we cover in the questions, there are many, many other aspects or layer in or layer out. But my one piece of advice for you as you go and do that is to really try and keep it simple. I'm going to go back for a second to where we started, right? Um, with this $25 billion platform stake. And there were so many good intentions here, right? And they were going to build the largest airplane ever, and it was going to have 15% lowering operating cost. And it was supposed to do all these things. But what they shipped in the end achieved none of the original goals. So if you take um, one thing away from this talk, then the thing that I want you to take away from this talk is to work backwards and to start from the ROI, start from the return on investment, and to say for this platform to give us a return on investment, what has to happen? And then what's the fastest way for us to actually measure that and to validate that? And what's the fastest way for us to move that? And if you work backwards like that, and you don't just do the ROI as an add-on at the end and an extra thing you do after the fact, but if you do the ROI from the beginning, um, and um, you start from you start from the ROI, and then you figure out what has to happen for this to be positive, then either you build a platform that really is ROI positive, or you don't build a platform, which can be a good outcome if it doesn't make financial sense to do so. So if you take one thing away from this, start from the ROI and work backwards, and don't just do the ROI as an afterthought. And I think I did answer the question that was there under the Q&A. And running these things is always hard. I'll say also as well, it's very hard to run these types of things and to manage the settings live. So it's much easier later um, to fix these things for further webinars, which I'm sure will be done. But it's a little bit harder to do that live on a webinar. And then final comment here, and then if there's no other questions, I'm going to wrap it up after this last question. Consider the risks associated with each approach. DevOps and IDP, including potential downtime, security vulnerabilities, and compliance risks. The cost of mitigating these risks. Which approach is better for a mid-level org or a heavy gov org agencies which are difficult to adopt changes? Yeah. We have one US gov customer, so I mean we work a little bit with different sectors, but you do have different requirements. And in government, you start to get into FedRAMP. And if you're in healthcare, then you start to get into HIPAA. So you have to always take everything here and then you have to adapt it to the organization that you're in, to your unique organizational requirements. Um, but start from the end. That's the one thing I would encourage you again and again. Start from the end. Start from when you're doing a project, especially a big project, start from what is the outcome that you would actually like to achieve if you are successful in building your platform whatever that means, and whether you're focusing here on reducing the number of tickets that you work on, like I encourage, or if you're focusing more on the compliance aspect, start from the end on if you are successful, what will success actually look like? What is success? It has to be something that is measurable, and it has to be something that you could fail at. Like The scary thing about this is that you can fail at it, right? Like you can say, this is my goal, and get everyone in line, we're going to reduce the support tickets, and then it doesn't happen. So the scary thing sometimes about like aligning on real ROI is that you can run through what you want to do and you can reach the end, and then you can be like the Airbus A380 and say, oh, there's no ROI. But if you're starting from the end, you're starting working backwards and you're doing this in short iterative sprints, then in the worst case scenario, you end up wasting 2 weeks and you learn from it and you adjust. You don't end up spending 3 quarters or a year or 2 years, a decade working on something in the case of like Airbus, and then finding out that that was wasted effort. So to wrap it up, I strongly encourage everyone to start with the end, to work backwards from ROI. And the simplest way to think about that and the easiest way to think about that is often from this single equation here on looking at how you really increase self-service by reducing the number of things that aren't self-service. So thank you everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure as always. And I will be also on the Slack for the platform engineering community as well afterwards. So feel free to send me questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And Sharik, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone else who participated in the chat. It's been a pleasure.